Ready? Okay, hello, this is Pete Cacciopi. I'm Chief Scientist at Opalytics, and today I'll be presenting a demonstration of publishing a parameterized notebook as an application. So this is part of a series of videos around parameterized notebooks, which is an innovation that we're developing here at Opalytics. And the idea is that by parameterizing a notebook, you can allow a user to run the notebook without editing the code. And the most advanced version of this is simply configuring the notebook so that it can be an app. So in this case, the user won't even be aware that he'll be running a notebook, but the developer will be able to maintain his app code as a notebook so that it's easier to debug. So as to begin, here we have a series of data scenarios, and we're going to be connecting to this data right here. This is simply the standard diet data. Now it's just stored as a data store, so it's not connected to any app at all. So let's jump back over here, and we're going to make a new notebook. So create a notebook. We'll call this the Ample Diet app. And the language of Python is fine. Here for the template, we're going to say a notebook instant app. And as always, the first thing to do is probably edit these parameters. Again, these parameters will be, in some situations, these parameters are available to the user. But for the developer, it's also helpful to be able to change the parameters because it makes it easy to point your notebook at different data sets. So here, let's make sure we're connected to that diet sample data ample, which is just diet data as a data store. Now you can see because we use the app template that we already have some sample code broken up into sections. And the idea here is that as long as we fill in these sections appropriately, the Opalytics platform will be able to convert this notebook into an actual app. You'll still be able to do all sort of the scratch work. You know, you'll be able to do trial and error like you do in a normal notebook. But the idea is that once you're ready to publish it, you'll organize so that these blocks of code fulfill their appropriate function, and then you can put your scratch cells outside of these core blocks, right? So anything between begin solver and end solver will be sort of the solve routine, but if you have some scratch code down here, it won't be part of the app. That's similarly true in between these sections here. So this block of code has been usefully written for us. This imports some key utilities that we'll use, and also creates a getDat function. So when we're running this as a notebook, this getDat function will be what gives us the data object. When it's being run as an app, the data object will be whatever the user has selected to run for that app. So as usual with notebooks, let's run cell by cell. Now before I run this cell, let's start copying over code here. So we have a diet example here that's using ample, and I could, of course, just use this diet.py file to make an ample instant app the way I've made a Gurobi instant app in another video. But here we're going to be showing how to write a notebook and then configure the notebook as the app. Cutting and pasting blocks of code from this example page back into this notebook that I'm building. And just as a reminder, this example page is public, Opalytics TickDat, examples, expert extension, ample, diet.py. So this is on the Opalytics TickDat page, which is publicly visible, and TickDat's an open source package. So let's make sure. So we want to bring this. Get that first cell, and it works. Okay, now here's where we're going to actually have to write out a fairly significant block of code. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to be actually writing this code all out, but I think you can trust me that there's lots of different types of logic that's being built here, and the definition of this input schema, and that would be a lot easier to do in a notebook where you can get feedback if you're making if any one line has some sort of a mistake, right? And so as an example, let me jump this scratch section here. Let's say if you were, say, confused about how the set data type function worked, in a notebook, you can always say something like input schema set data type. And here's the help for how set data type, right? This is the doc string. So this is what makes notebooks great. So this block of code that just executed successfully sets up the input schema. So let's do the same thing with the solution schema. Solution schema is, of course, much simpler. And now we will write the solve routine, right? So here we'll be copying in code from this proper solve routine over here. So this is an actual solve function. Here, this is just the cells of a notebook. And we can break our solve function up into as many notebook cells as we want for purposes of easy troubleshooting or easy debugging. Now, as the comments tell us, we don't want to edit this first cell because this is the way that you get the data object when you're running it as a notebook. We don't want to edit this final cell because this is the way that the Opalytics Cloud Platform knows what you're returning. So probably a good protocol is to make sure that SL object is defined, so it can always, there's nothing wrong with having it be none for situations where you can't find a feasible solution. Oops, and I forgot to execute the cell, so I'm execute the cell, and then execute that one just to be clean. All right, now let's insert a cell above. And let's execute this. I'll cut and paste this block of code here since it's a good stopping point if something was going wrong, right? So, and our Opalytics notebook is smart enough to know how to shift tab over. Okay, so now this looks good. So again, this is a large, or not a large, but it's a large string that represents sort of the mod file code, right? So if there was something screwy in this eval code right here, we would want to see that exception right then and there, right? We would want to see whatever feedback Ample gives us here is going to be helpful for troubleshooting this mod file code. So this is a good point to stop and execute. Okay, and of course I've tested this already, right? So that code doesn't have any problems in it. But Ample does give you really nice exceptions and messaging when you have some problem with your code. And now, what's this next block? Here we set the data object and we solve. So let's do that. So again, I'm not really explaining this code in great detail. I'm going to write a blog where I talk all about the TICDAT convenience routines that were built to support Ample, and I'll explain this diet example and a few other examples in painstaking detail. My focus here is really to show how a notebook can be configured to run as an app. Okay, and the solve function worked, and it looked like we got a feasible solution. Now, bear in mind, because we're going to be publishing this as an app, we're going to want to use this if statement, even though it's not really needed in this case, right? So I can tell from the sort of results that from the output that Ample gave us here when I called solve that, of course, it found the solutions, right? Here's the objective that it found. So for this particular data set, there's no reason to check whether the solve result is infeasible or not. But in general, we want to do this, right? We know that in the future, some user is going to come along and feed it infeasible data inevitably. So it's important that we obey proper hygienic rules of, you don't query the solution until you're sure that a solution exists. And it's nice to evaluate this final line so you see what it is, what kind of solution object was created. And why not just go down here, the scratch space below, and say look at that solution object a little bit, see what the parameter values are. And sure enough, 11.828, that's the expected value. That was the same result that was given up here. So this all worked just fine. So now we go here, we hit publish this as a notebook, and the notebook was saved as an app. If you want to jump over here, you can view it as an app. And as an app, it's called the Ample Diet app. And you can see that it knows, it has the tables are all defined properly for the input. The tables all defined properly for the solution. And finally, let's jump back here to where we started to run it. So we were in here. We had made the notebook in here. It's still there as a notebook. So if I go back and re-edit it and save it, it'll change the saved app. But for here, we can just open this data set that I had before. The data was stored here before, just as simple data in a data store. So let's connect that to the engine that we just built. Custom app, Ample Diet app. And sometimes this platform is a little fussy. Hopefully it won't take too long to revalidate. Looks like it's making a little progress on that. All right, and it validated. So there's no errors here. Again, we can show with other videos how if there's data integrity errors, they show up nicely here, so you can identify dirty data. But here we just run solve. And here we have the expected results, total cost, and this is the hamburger ice cream diet that's associated with this data set. So I think that gives a pretty good tour of the functionality to start with. Again, what would happen if a user came along and gave you some funky data and you got some kind of exception throw, you got an infeasible solution, you could then jump back to the notebook and the developer could run it as a notebook. And because the developer is actually running a notebook, you have an app that is essentially very easy to debug on the cloud, because what you're debugging is a notebook and not a .py file. Now, what's even nicer is that we actually have a debugger for the notebook, but I'm going to go through the debugger in a different video. So thanks for your attention, and I hope to see you on other Opalytics videos.